This is a story of Zopyrus, the story of the second capture of Babylon, as he says, is one that comes from 522, 521 BCE, so about 100 years before the time that Herodotus is putting the final version of his histories together. And it's a story that comes from a very early stage of the reign of King Darius, who was the father of Xerxes, the king, who is going to dominate the later books because Xerxes will be the king that invades in 480. Darius is still very insecure on the throne, and we know, in fact, that that's historically true. He's still in the first year of his monarchy, and there was a great surge of rebellions throughout the empire. There were probably 2 rebellions within a year within Babylon, so that is a memory that has survived here. It's doubtless a memory of a real rebellion and a real siege. Whether the siege ended like this is another question, but it's building on something there. The idea that the siege would have ended through treachery is not unreasonable. It took an awful lot to take a city by siege, particularly one as well defended as Babylon was. So the idea that there was treachery in the air is natural. The story of somebody who is so loyal to his king and so devoted to the cause that he's prepared to mutilate himself, go in covered in wounds, covered in blood, to give himself credibility. That's an old story as well, as indeed a version of that as early as Homer, where Odysseus does that. Doesn't quite mutilate himself, but gives himself some scars and some wounds so that he can get into the Trojan city. So that it's building on an old story type. It's also building on some assumptions that Herodotus's Greek audience might have about what Persians were like. One thing that they like to think about Persians is that they went in for mutilation. That this is what kings did. They like to mutilate their subjects, and in fact the particular form of mutilation, cutting off the nose, cutting off the ears, was something that was part of the Persian penal code, that some malefactors would have this happening to them. And in a way that just gives credibility. It wouldn't be surprising, the poor Babylonians might think, that a king would treat his subjects like this. Of course, in fact, it's voluntary, but they don't know that. The certain amount of the brutality is just quietly there at the end, where we're told that Darius impaled Anescalopisse, was it 3,000 of the people he'd taken prisoners? So, this is not a cuddly king, and that's one thing that people like to think. Another thing is that Persians were expected to show completely unthinking devotion to their monarch, that this is again one of the features of a monarchy. Story later on of, in fact, Darius' son Xerxes, who on his ship back from the disasters of the Persian Wars runs into a terrible storm and is told by the pilot that the only way to save himself is if we reduce some weight. So the Persian noblemen are duly all line up and are duly told to leap overboard. And they do so. And Xerxes gets safely to harbour and first of all rewards the pilot for saving his life and then executes him for killing all these Persian noblemen. So you've got brutality and selfless devotion there as well. So there are some themes that the story picks up on that would be ways that the Greeks like to think about Persians. But they're all introduced with a bit of a twist. It's not brutality imposed by the king. It's brutality showing a real selfless devotion at the end. And also the fact that Darius doesn't take it for granted and shows a great appreciation of Zopyrus. You may have taken the city, but ends up by saying it wasn't worth it. I'd far prefer you to have been safe, which is a rather humane and rather unexpected, I would guess, to the Greek audience twist at the end.